The Fed's set to hike rates, but I'll tell you one thing, it's not going to matter. It's not going to matter enough. It's not going to actually contain this inflation, because the truth is inflation is so much worse than anyone is letting on. When you actually peel back, look at these numbers and compare these numbers with the old calculations, the way we used to look at inflation, what you actually find is inflation is just as bad as it was back in the early 80s, meaning we're more like 13, 14% rather than 8%. And it means the Federal Reserve is going to have to do a whole lot more than a few rate hikes here and there. Get ready, everyone. We're about to feel the pain. We're going to talk about all of this because the Fed really, in my estimation, has no shot at curbing inflation. And right now is just going to make everything worse for everybody. Portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. There's never been a better time to invest in precious metals, given, obviously, all this inflation than right now. So go to legacypminvestments.com for more. Again, legacypminvestments.com. Higher interest rates mean the cost of money goes up. The idea being that we're going to take some of that money out of the supply. You got a huge money supply right now and no way of really containing it other than to say, make the cost of borrowing go higher. So that means mortgage rates go up. That means credit card rates go up. That means all loan rates go up. Theoretically, then, people won't borrow as much money and therefore won't do such reckless things with their money, which leads to all this inflation. Milton Friedman, the great U.S. economist, Nobel Prize winning economist and statistician, once said that basically there's only one way to create all this inflation, and it's through money printing. Let me get you the exact quote. He said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon in the sense that it is and can be produced only by a more rapid increasing in the quantity of the money than in the output. And this is exactly what we saw in the last couple of years. You had a Federal Reserve actively printing money, adding to that money supply more than $6 trillion. Money supply, of course, is all the money, right? In our economy, you're talking about cash and checking accounts, you're talking about savings deposits, also money market mutual funds, all this money that's out there. Well, it grew about 42% because the Fed wanted to make sure that there was enough liquidity to really see us through those challenging days that we confronted in March 2020. You also had a government that was willing to do the exact same thing. Remember all the stimulus checks? Well, this added up to a heck of a lot of money in the system, which is chasing so few goods, which created, of course, the inflation levels that we now see. And the problem is, because of the shift in calculation in terms of how we look at inflation, the economists at the Federal Reserve aren't doing enough. In other words, they don't really understand that we're looking at 1980 style, 13.6% inflation rather than the 8% that they think they've got. It's one of the reasons why I think, and we'll get to a little more of this in just a moment, I think you need to be really thoughtful about how you're investing right now. It's one of the reasons why I encourage people to look at things other than stocks. I mean, maybe dividend stocks. I talk about those a lot because I like them. But other than stocks, one of the ways you can do this is through Key City Capital. Key City Capital is an investment advisor for accredited investors that is almost like a small private equity fund. You can invest in asset-backed lending and other various vehicles that they have. You can check them out at keycitycapital.com/Trish. Charlie Dombach, actually, who runs the shop there, he's going to be on the program on Friday, so you can hear a little bit more from him. But you got to think creatively here. Inflation, as I said, it's so much worse than was reported. You see, back in 1983, they decided to change how they looked at inflation. The economists thought, there's too much emphasis on housing. We got mortgages, the full value of the 30-year mortgage included in here, as well as what people are paying in payments, the home purchase price, all this stuff. Let's just strip it out. And so instead, they changed it to what it is today, a system in which they're frankly undervaluing housing as a portion of where one's money goes in any given month. Consequently, and you know how much housing has increased, consequently, we're actually not reporting at 8% a really true level. I mean, you could say, all right, if you wanted to be really picky about this, you could say, well, let's go back and look at those 1980s numbers. Maybe that 13.6% was more like 9% and change. And Larry Summers, the former U.S. Treasury Secretary, has done some research into this, including a paper. He thinks we are basically where we were back in the early 80s. Whether it's 13.6% or whether it's 8% and change, I don't care. If we're back where we were in the 80s, it means the Federal Reserve has to do so much more than what they're doing. And I do not believe that Jerome Powell has quite the stamina for this. Surprising, because you'd think that he just wants to do what's best for the economy, but not surprising in that you gotta have some strong constitution to raise rates as much as he would need to. If you go back to Volcker, Paul Volcker, head of the Federal Reserve after Burns, he had to do a lot of work to try and rein in inflation, and in doing so, doubled interest rates effectively. I mean, he took them from 11% to 20%. Think about that. 20% was the benchmark rate at the Federal Reserve. Jerome Powell's legacy at this point now is really on the line. He has got to come forward with a plan that's aggressive enough. And this is not aggressive enough because he's pretending like we got 8% inflation when it may be a whole lot more, like 13.6% inflation or even higher. And so that is concerning. The money supply went way, way up. You got a system of government that really believes that, hey, inflation is no big deal. Why not? I mean, what else are they telling us when they're willing to pay $20,000 to everybody who got a Pell Grant? So in many cases now, you've got people paying for the $20,000 and $10,000 loans, student loan forgiveness that maybe didn't even go to college themselves. Maybe they couldn't afford to go to college. They didn't think that they could go to college. They didn't go to college, but they earn enough money to pay for all the people who can't pay their bills. Again, increasing the money supply. This is what this administration is most interested in doing. And it makes you wonder what the heck Jerome Powell was ever thinking all along. Was this all about keeping his job? I mean, did he just that badly want to get appointed to another term? So he allowed this to continue and made such a devastating mistake for the American economy. And frankly, if he's on Joe Biden's side or Janet Yellen's side, a really big mistake for the Democrat Party, because inflation is the biggest issue. Look at any poll. 70% of Americans say they're really concerned about it, and understandably so. When they're reporting this 8% in change, it's actually, like I said, far more similar, far worse, much closer to what we saw in those really challenging days of the early 1980s before Volcker came in and did what he had to do. Not that anybody in Washington, D.C. notices. I mean, for goodness sakes, the fact that they sat there as long as they did and told us this was transitory, that was so blatantly irresponsible and intellectually vacant. Anybody who looked at those numbers should have known. I've been sitting here for what? Since summer of 2020 saying, watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out. This is a train wreck, an inflation train wreck happening. And now we're seeing it play out in real time. So what does this mean? When the Federal Reserve raises rates like this, they're going to try and restrict the money supply. They're not going to be able to do it enough, which means you're going to basically cause this economic pain to last longer. This is the stagflation fear. Because you're not moving aggressively enough, you're going to just make it miserable for more people for a longer period of time. Unfortunately, it's going to have to get a little miserable. Unfortunately, I say that because we've never seen the Federal Reserve be able to pull back in a way that actually protects the economy. And right now they have no other choice. So we are most likely heading into a much worse recession, and a recession that could be prolonged by Jerome Powell's lack of leadership there at the Fed. You know, it takes a heck of a lot of nerve and a whole lot of confidence and a whole lot of vision to be able to do what Paul Volcker did. Can Jerome Powell do it? I think the answer is already out there for us. He is not moving enough We will consequently have more problems. They're putting little Band-Aids on. I mean, they got to get through November, right? Don't forget political consequences here, which is a shame because this is supposed to be a church and state. This is supposed to be a Chinese wall. And yet our Treasury Secretary used to be Jerome Powell's boss. So think about that. I mean, I know he was appointed by Trump, but he has shown, unfortunately, his true colors, and he is not willing to take the pain himself. He's not willing to allow the American economy to take the pain that it needs in the near term in order to have a better outcome in the future. So it's going to be what it's going to be. We'll see how he does, but I'm not encouraged. I am definitely not encouraged. Great to have you here as always. I do want you to subscribe to the show on Apple. You can do that on Apple or on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Rumble, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel here, and I will see you tomorrow with more.